Hello, my name is Trina Sørensen and I'm a curator working at the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, Denmark. Today I will be presenting a paper entitled The Gislingerbåt Open Source Project From Experimental Archaeology to Outreach. The project may sound familiar, as I presented a paper on it back at EAC 10 in Leiden in 2017, so the paper today is really an updated account of what has happened in the interim, since the project was officially concluded at the museum, but has gone on to have a life of its own in the digital sphere. Like all experimental archaeological projects, our project also began with a find, the Gislingerbåt. And to put the boat in context, in map number 1, you can see Denmark and the island of Zealand on the right. Map number 2 depicts the Lammefjord, as it was prior to a large-scale reclamation project in the 1870s, where the fjord was reclaimed as agricultural land. The X marks the find site of the boat, quite close to the original coastline. Finally, map 3 shows the location of the find site, just north of the village of Gislinge. And here you can see the Gislingerbåt during excavation in 1993. Several details of the boat's construction, the stepped stem, the overlapping planks and so on, suggested that the boat may have dated from the Viking Age, and so it was something of a media sensation in Denmark at the time. The Gislingerbåt was built of oak and extensively repaired with patches of beech, as you can see in the upper left image, so it was well worn and used by the time it ended its days on the bottom of the Lammefjord. To the disappointment of some, and the delight of others, the boat was dated to circa 1125-1130, and is therefore technically a medieval boat rather than a Viking Age one. So it would have been an everyday kind of vessel for transporting people and goods around the fjord landscape. It was reconstructed in full scale at the museum for the first time in 1995, and some years later, Estrel, as the boat was named, was sold to a maritime museum in South Korea. Then we fast forward to 2015 and the development of an idea that Søren Nielsen, head of the Viking Ship Museum Boatyard, had been mulling over for several years. Inspired by the IT world's open source concept, we developed a project based on the same principles. We decided to make the working drawings for a reconstructed archaeological boat find freely available in order to see if we could get others started with building their own version of the boat. The Gislingerbåt was chosen for several reasons. It was the right size, had to be a boat people would have room to build, not a 30-metre long warship. We had the drawings for it, and finally, we needed a Gislingerbåt in our collection since Estrel had been sold to South Korea. The project had an experimental archaeological core in the full-scale reconstruction of the Gislingerbåt, with a focus on iron ore for the ship's rivets and the manufacture and use of a linen sail. But the main purpose of the project was to test the limit as to how we could involve people in our work to reconstruct the boat. Not only those who visited the museum, but also people around the world. Could we communicate the experimental archaeological process in a way that might inspire people to try building a Gislingerbåt themselves? The plan was to build a full-scale reconstruction of the Gislingerbåt at the museum boatyard and communicate the entire process via the project's blog, website and social media, so that all aspects of the process would be communicated and explained via text, photo and film. We have always worked with documentation of our reconstruction projects, but the digital dissemination usually occurred afterwards when the work had been completed. So the idea of kind of here and now outreach was something of an untried method for us. So we had a lot of questions. Would it be possible to communicate craft processes in an understandable way? Anyone who has ever held a tool in their hands knows that it can be extremely difficult to translate practical craft actions into words. Would people find it interesting? I don't think I'll offend anyone here by saying that we're all quite nerdy in terms of our interest in experimental archaeology and that we all think it's the most exciting thing in the world, but would others agree and share our enthusiasm? And if we managed to capture people's interest, would anyone take it a step further and get involved in maritime craftwork and experimental archaeology? Fortunately, it soon turned out that the answer, at least to the first 2 points, was yes. There was a great interest in the project, and people around the world began to follow the process online. We communicated the construction of the Gislingerbåt via several different platforms, the blog on the museum website, via Facebook where we had several updates a week, and we also created an Instagram profile, which was probably the most used platform because it's so straightforward and well suited to real-time dissemination. Common to all digital dissemination in the project was the insistence on professional quality. We didn't just want some nice aesthetic photographs and a sea of emojis. The post should convey proper information of an academic standard. And we didn't know at first if there would be an audience for this kind of content on social media, but thankfully there was. As you can see here, the posts we shared about the Gissling boat time and again turned out to be incredibly popular and reached a much larger audience than other content, such as our marine archaeological excavations. So far so good. People followed along online and at the boatyard, but what about our ambition to get others to build a boat? As I mentioned before, working drawings for the boat were shared via the website, and this should be emphasised here that they are pure working drawings. It's definitely not an IKEA-style step-by-step explanation. These are a drawing set that requires some experience and knowledge to be able to use them to build a boat. And although this wasn't something we did intentionally, it actually turned out to be an advantage because the relatively sparse information available in the drawings made people seek more knowledge from the website, Facebook, etc. This is an extract from an email sent by Edvards Pukirius from Estonia, who was one of the first to download the drawings, and he says that, and I quote, "The information in the working drawings has been hugely important, but all the material that was released by the museum, as well as the many films and pictures that were shared online, have been even more important to us." So people started downloading the drawings, but would anyone actually build a boat? The answer is yes, fortunately, otherwise this paper would have had a slightly more depressing conclusion. I was responsible for documentation and dissemination of the project, so I have taken many hundreds of pictures of the Gissling boat. But I usually say that this is one of my favourite pictures because I didn't take it. The picture you can see here was sent by Edvards, who I just mentioned, and it was the first sign we had that others had started building a Gissling boat. So it was a totally celebratory moment for us because it was our first concrete feedback that the concept had worked. So we continued building our own boat at the museum during 2015, and in the autumn Gisli was launched, and in theory the project should come to a close. But we'd gotten a little hooked on the project and the whole open source approach, could see that people were still downloading drawings and that more and more had started their own projects. So we decided to build one more Gissling boat, with the same focus on digital dissemination during the construction process. The result was Langu, which was launched in 2017, and which you can see on the fjord here together with Gisli. And then we at the museum couldn't really stretch it anymore. We had a new ship to build, and we had to figure out how to conclude the project in a way that made sense. So we decided to stay true to the open source approach we had tried and basically just let go of the project. The working drawings, blog posts, and all the other dissemination would still be available, but we wouldn't invest more of our time and resources in keeping the project running. We created a Facebook group for people who had downloaded the drawings in the hope that the digital community we had kept going by investing time and dialogue on the blog, social media, etc., would be able to develop into a more independent community where people could help each other by solving the problems that they had with their own Gissling boat projects. But of course there was also a risk that the project would just fade out, that people would lose interest when new updates and content from our site stopped. We didn't really know which way it was going to go. But luckily it went onwards and upwards. Here you can see a selection of some of the many Gissling boat projects that people have shared with us. Several boats, both as scale models and full scale, from as far afield as the US, Argentina, France, Sweden, a newspaper article from the Czech Republic about a Gissling boat that's being built down there. Our Facebook group went from being a small handful of Gissling enthusiasts to over 2,200 members who share pictures and film updates from their own construction projects. Here you can see a classic example of how it works. Someone asks a question about rows, and then it doesn't take long before people post tips, tricks, and recommendations based on their own experiences. Another consequence of the open source approach has been the various networks that have been established on the basis of the project, from community boat building in Duluth, Minnesota, to craft groups in northern France. Here you can see two pictures sent by Ryan Anderson from Normandy. Ryan has gone all in terms of his approach and wants to build his boat using authentic tools. Not satisfied with the tools he could find online and at Viking markets, he went in search of a blacksmith who had the right skills to make what he needed. And their collaboration has since resulted in a new sideline for the blacksmith, who has thrown himself into the study and reconstruction of archaeological finds, while Ryan has become involved in a network of craftsmen that he might otherwise never have met. Similarly, Authentic Build is also currently underway in Connecticut, USA, where Leeds Island Boatworks have been commissioned to build a full-scale reconstruction of the Gislinge boat for a non-profit military veterans association based in Virginia. Matthew Barnes, one half of Leeds Island Boatworks, served an internship at our museum boatyard when we built Langroo, so the boat and the processes involved in its construction aren't entirely new to him. Nevertheless, working exclusively with reconstructed woodworking tools is a challenge that helps develop his skill set as a craftsman, and the attention the project has received in the press and within the wooden boat community on the East Coast has helped to raise our profile stateside. There are also projects that are as far removed from experimental archaeology as can be. Here you can see some photographs of the computer-cut epoxy and glue version of the Gislinge boat that has been developed by John Harris and the team at Chesapeake Lightcraft, also in the US. Their goal is to produce a build-it-yourself kit that's a more realistic option for the average non-boat builder, but which will allow them to build a craft that resembles the original boat at a fraction of the material costs. So it's not necessarily a project that will contribute to the academic study of the Gislinge boat and medieval boat building techniques, but it's one that raises awareness of the museum and the work we do, bringing us into contact with a new audience. Many hundreds have downloaded the drawings, and some of the projects have a completely different character than the ones that we usually deal with as a museum. In Darlington, England, the Viking Boat Company, a non-profit community enterprise for veterans, is also building a Gislinge boat. But in contrast to the example from the States where professional boat builders were hired to do the work, here the veterans will build the boat themselves under the guidance of craft specialists. Boat builder Mike Holtham is overseeing the build and has an incredibly inclusive ethos to the process and insists that as long as you can, and I quote, hold a paintbrush between your teeth, then he can find a task for everyone who wants to be involved. A thoroughly fantastic project and one that we can't take any credit for at all, but it says something about how we can make experimental archaeology interesting and relevant to others besides ourselves if we're willing to share our knowledge and experience. What impact has this had on us as a museum in terms of how we work with experimental archaeology? Well, it has clearly set a new standard for us in terms of how we attempt to involve our audience, both at the museum and online, in our work. We don't always take the fences down entirely and invite people right up to the boat, as you can see here, but are striving to find a balance where active dialogue with the boat builders is encouraged. It has given us great insight into the potential of real-time dissemination of experimental archaeology, that for many people the process is just as interesting, if not more so, than the end result. This project has shown time and again that there is an appetite for challenging, complex content with technical language and high levels of detail. In a museum context, it's perhaps also important to underline that in our case, it's the archaeologist and the boat builder who create this content, not people in traditional communications or marketing posts. So in other words, it can pay to let your academic staff take the reins with digital communication. It has also given us an understanding of how strong a communication platform social media can be. It's not just for selfies and food photos, or for marketing for that matter, but that you can make good professional dissemination in an easily accessible way that neither costs a lot of money nor takes a lot of time, but which can involve wider audiences in your work, whether they're visiting the boatyard in Denmark or on the other side of the Atlantic. So what does the future hold for the Gislinge boat? After many years hidden from the public, the long process of conservation is complete, and in 2024 the boat will be exhibited for the first time at Holbæk Museum in Denmark. And what of the Gislinge boat open source project? The drawings are still available, the Facebook group is still open, and increasing in membership. We still have some work ahead of us in terms of formally evaluating the impact of the project. It's been a project that has contributed to our experimental archaeology practice, but even more so, a project that has had a real and lasting impact on how we as a museum work with dissemination and outreach. So perhaps we'll be back at another EXAC conference in 10 years and see where the Gislinge boat saga has taken us then. Thank you to EXAC and the committee of EAC 13 for the opportunity to present today.